Hello, so for here, I figured I'd focus in on a specific DC Comics character, that being Dr. Anthony Ivo. This man is noteworthy for creating Amazo, the ultimate adaptive android who can mimic the powers of any superpowered individual, in some cases the ultimate weapon against the Justice League. Here, I figured I'd focus in on Ivo. As I find with fan adaptations, there's a lot of interesting flavors to this man. What kind of person does it take to create the ultimate adaptive android? Sometimes the android doesn't even come into play. The focus is more on the scientist himself. Lots of interesting layers and who exactly your Ivo would be. So I figure I'd start with the DC Anime Universe appearance with a Amazo episode where Ivo's dead and Amazo's taking care of him. To later be more of a central focus of the plot. I think this is interesting and sort of ominous for Ivo adaptations later on. It's also interesting how it reflects with Amazo, as this is a more compassionate version of Amazo, who's more empathetic with other people, as well as just insanely OP. Most OP fell in the show. He couldn't be beaten, he could only use reason. But anyway, cool stuff. Now going to the Young Justice adaptation. Here we actually get an alive Ivo. It's interesting looking at the Young Justice show and what carries over from the DC Anime universe. Like both evolve an ever-expanding Justice League roster, only while the original DC Anime universe went from 7 core members to anyone goes. Here they have something more structured, where gradually new members are added each year and you get to see how certain people are voted in. In the case with Ivo, they alluded to the idea that he was once considered dead, but is later revealed to be alive. This Ivo is fine. You know, he's cocky, has a bit of an ego. He's voiced by Dr. Octopus from Spectacular Spider-Man, so he went from one scientist with an ego to another. The Amazo android plays a pretty big part in the introductory episode, taking a long time for Justice League to take down and later took some strategy from the young heroes. After the episode, it doesn't really come into play again and focuses more on Ivo himself. It's interesting seeing his rivalry with Tio-Maro, another fellow android creator, and how he's sort of jealous of him. I mean, Amazo is clearly the much more formidable weapon, but the Tornado fellow's got some style. It's interesting there's an episode where Zatanna makes him reveal location through magic, and I was like, I didn't mean to do that, leading to Hugo to look at him ominously. Like, I thought this would be a tell that he's gonna die, but he does make one more appearance later. Overall, it's kind of interesting he only appears in season 1. Like, with how ever expansive this whole world is, not to mention the monumental time jumps, I'm like, is this dude even around during events of season 2, 3, or 4? Makes you think of it. Anyway, now on to the Arrow version of Ivo. This is an interesting case, since Arrow was going through a bit of a transitional period. Season 1 was generally pretty grounded with basically no supernatural stuff. Season 2 was starting to test the waters with like super soldier people and hints of the Flash, for season 3 onward to embrace that stuff more, with the Flash running congruently. Anyway, Ivo appears in season 2, in the island flashbacks. At the time, the dude doesn't even have an Amazo android, just a freaking ship called the Amazo, even though the Amazo android appears many seasons later, in one of the show's most heightened crossovers, Elseworlds. Yeah, quite a contrast. Anyway, here Ivo is looking for the mysterious weapon called Mirakuru. This man is ruthless, experimenting with people on his dastard ship. He even ends up putting Oliver Queen in a bit of a Sophie's choice, between saving Sarah or Shadow. It's interesting seeing different dimensions to him, like the way Sarah's developed this kinship with this sort of man, referring to him as Anthony. Also the whole thing where his wife has dementia and him calling her while she's sick. This is easily the strongest season of Arrow flashbacks, and Ivo is a big driver of that story. Ultimately does cause Slade to turn on Oliver. I used to think more negatively of this Ivo, since he's part of a more grounded story. However, revisiting Arrow and season 2 just overall being my favorite season, yeah, I like this Ivo for what he is. Sick man who deserves to be put out of his misery. It's interesting the Arrow case. The Mirakuru that Ivo is hunting for is this weapon that the Japanese thought would have been their ultimate weapon way back during World War II. So I like some of the historical relevancy with that. Now on to My Adventures of Superman. This case is interesting since now this is an Ivo where his main thing isn't even being tied with Amazo. It's Parasite. He's like the show's version of Parasite. When hearing of all this stuff, I was a little skeptical, but as things played out, he won me over. He's easily evolved with the best episodes in season 1. His characterization felt similar to Young Justice Ivo, being egotistic and narcissistic, though it's weird to see him tied to all this billionaire stuff. However, everything clicks once I hear the board man call him Tony. Tony. Oh my gosh. My Adventures of Superman made Ivo an evil Iron Man. And I am all for this. And the actor has a lot of fun with narcissism, and gradually you see this Ivo more warped by hatred. When he first gets deformed in a parasite suit, it seems he would have a more background role, but instead, he gets even more vengeance-filled and ends up as a literal kaiju parasite.
You turned me into a monster!
Chose to be a monster, Ivo.
Overall, great stuff there. A few things to note. Later on in a tie-in comic, it's revealed the parasite suit breaks off on its own and in fact does become the show's version of Amazo, which Clark has to be sympathetic with. There's also ties with Lex. There's a whole Lex embargo where he couldn't be named earlier on, but the show creators found loopholes making him Ivo's assistant, and were able to eventually naturally build him up, with Lex literally stepping over an incapacitated parasite Ivo. It would be interesting to think what would happen if Ivo was just the show's mad scientist villain, but I'm kind of glad they were actually able to play with Lex. And as for one more Ivo adaptation, the Tomorrowverse, Crisis on Infinite Earths, they reveal through the Justice League's backstory. Their first threat here was indeed Amazo, and there's this whole mystery where Ivo has this rare genetic disease, where he's super aged despite being over 30, and how Lex manipulated things. It's kind of interesting after all the malicious bastard Ivos. We kind of just went back to a sympathetic one. But it works for the story here and kind of ties in for the DC Animated Universe version of Ivo, with him seeming more sympathetic. Now, something that I find interesting and kind of helpful when analyzing the Ivos is to contrast him with the scientist from English literature, that being Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Oh yeah, we going there. Now, evidently both these guys are genius scientists. The story of Frankenstein was created during the 1800s, so the concept of super science was quite different, but quite ahead of its time. Victor Frankenstein creates life, much like Ivo creates life, being the creature and Amazo. Both these beings are immensely strong, often quite contemplative, and also, interestingly enough, are made up of parts, the creature being made up of human parts from God who knows where, and Amazo being made up of parts of other heroes, so a lot more to contemplate. How does an Ivo relate to their respective Amazo, which, despite the distance between some, they all actually do have some form of Amazo. In the Justice League show, at least Ivo is somewhat kind, and that's reflected into Amazo as well, being a very interesting fella. All the power and all the wonder. Tower of Fate, baby. In Young Justice, we deal with a more sick and twisted Ivo, with a pretty bog standard Amazo. You know, it's got an impressive array of powers, literally explains whose abilities he's taking. A pretty husky Amazo to fit a pretty sinister Ivo. Arrow's Ivo is by far the most distant from the Amazo eventually to be. I don't know if he really even has a connection, but it's interesting to see the contrast from the Ivo that was. In My Adventures of Superman, Amazo's literally manifested from the parasite suit, something Ivo very personally used as a weapon. However, he ends up being better than the sum of its parts, being a rare case of a bad Ivo with a good Amazo. And the Tomorrowverse version of Amazo follows similar steps to the Justice League animated version, with an Ivo that we very clearly see is sympathetic, just wanting to prolong his life. And after Ivo dies, Amazo still helps Barry, even while he's super old. So we got a fair bit of different contrasts between the creator and the creation. Some cases where Amazo perfectly aligns with Ivo's monstrous design, others where he subverts Ivo's intentions, and cases where they both have to be good. Same go for Frankenstein adaptations, by the way. A lot leaning into Victor being the monster and the creature actually being a lot more sympathetic. Though funny enough, in the original Mary Shelley book, Victor is way more meek, just wanting to subvert death. And the creature is a lot more monstrous and brutish, psychopathically killing everyone. Also talks quite a lot, dude's a wordsmith. It's also interesting noting other characters Ivos bounce off of. Like Young Justice Ivo created Amazo to combat the Justice League. So when facing the young heroes with Amazo, his cockiness gets better with him while he's present for the fight. In My Adventures of Superman, it's again frickin' Superman, one of the most powerful superheroes ever. And this dude thinks he could take on that? Okay. Contrasting that with Arrow where it's literally just Green Arrow, someone with no powers. But hey, he sure is a bastard with him. Lex Luthor might be one of the most recurring characters in contrast to Ivo. Like, the dude ended up using his android after Ivo passed in the Justice League show. Similar thing with Chrysler on Infinite Earths while he's getting old. Meanwhile, with Maz, as already discussed, he's Ivo's assistant, later usurp him. One super scientist getting usurped by another debatably more evil super scientist. Anyway, what are your takes on Ivos? How do you feel about the contrast to Amazo? Which Ivo do you lean more towards or have a preference towards? Feel free to let me know, and cheers.